I want to talk to Jared in Indiana, whose question is the host's opinions about extremists in the church and how to discuss it with family when you are out of the church. You're on the line with Jmike and Johnny P. Tell us a little bit more. Like, is this something you're dealing with personally?
Yeah, kind of. Yes. Through a text message, I had asked my family's opinion on an extremist group, and my family was first off kind of didn't want to respond, and so then I sent them some of their literature, and I was just like, hey, they're nationwide, you guys where you live, you should be aware of some of their symbolism. To which my family then started to more of respond with, well, people nowadays you got to be careful with using the word extremist. People aren't always that extreme. And it seemed like they were more sympathizers. And how do you have a conversation with your family at that point?
I'd say get specific. I would say don't do an editorial on a particular group because they might have incomplete information or very different information that is more complete than yours. I would say if there is something that is extreme or dangerous or whatever, or maybe something they would find objectionable, I would focus on that aspect of it first and let them come to the conclusion that that's an extremist position. Rather than saying, hey, these people are cuckoo crazy, baddies, right? And they're like, well, actually, no, they have some very good beliefs in this. And I think you're just going to, you're going to taint everything that you've said up to that point. I have sort of had to deal with that with family members where they believe certain speakers. And if I just say, yeah, that orange man's a real piece of shit, that piques my mother's dander. No, you don't pique dander. I don't know what you do with dander, but it puts her on the defensive, and now she feels that she has to defend all of her other opinions about this person who's a good Christian man, apparently, rather than say, how do you feel about this particular thing that's being done? Oh, I don't think that he's really doing that, or they're really doing that thing. And say, okay, well, here's some examples of that. And then you can't just eat the whole pie at once. You got to cut it up into pieces and take one bite of each piece at a time and walk along the path. And I've talked about this before. It may be that you have to open yourself up to a true conversation, not one that is confrontational. And it might turn out that in the course of that conversation that might take place over many days, weeks, months, years, or a lifetime, that you never make the progress that you're looking to make. You might not be the person to be there if the progress, if that threshold is crossed. But you have to be very much aware of how your words are being received. The conversations we have in real life are not like the conversations that we have here. I can't just mute my mother when she's trying to say that the election was stolen. I have to make a face or something. I don't know what I do, but there's a long-term strategy that you need to apply, and it will be uniquely catered, individually catered to each conversation that you have, not only with the person, but the time and the place that you're making those conversations. So.
May I respond quick?
Yeah, and Mike, you should respond after that, but you should unmute yourself first.
That's what I was hoping for. If that's okay, if you have the time.
No, you go ahead and respond. I'm just dumb, so don't worry about that.
Well, I feel like anytime that I try to bring up anything, it gets very much, one of my family members will say, hey, let's shut this down, and suggest that we don't talk about it. And I have changed my approach, because in the past I was accused of being overly passionate, and a little bit that I was kind of like hiding like that I had information. And so I'm trying to do more of like Socratic questioning. And so I know that that's something like I need to learn how to do, but I just also know that I don't know how to tiptoe around quietly enough to be able to get to the point where people are willing to even have a conversation. Like I guess that's kind of like where I'm struggling, is because every time I do bring it up, it's met with, let's not talk about it. Let's not talk about it.
So
I
I
don't know.
I completely understand that perspective, especially being kind of shoot off on it. The thing is that I'd kind of echo is like, if someone doesn't want to explain the beliefs they have or defend them, they're not obligated to do that for you, right? Like, you can't really force them. Like, no, we're having this conversation. But echo kind of what Johnny's saying, it's like, you got to start with the individual basis. If you know the person that you're dealing with, say you had a history with them, and you've seen them get caught in a lie like several times and they deny it even when faced with the evidence, probably not going to make a lot of progress, because they can't even be honest with themselves, right? They can't even look themselves in the mirror and say when they've messed up and when they need to be responsible. And so I don't know how they're going to be responsible for beliefs independent of them, right? When they can't be responsible for the things that make them up as a person. And so once you've kind of crossed that off going, well, that's that person, I wouldn't want to say it's hopeless. Like, there's always a chance, but those are going to be the ones that are going to be hardest to kind of crack open, so to speak. But the other people that are willing to listen, a lot of it's how you say it and the passion you bring into the conversation. I know one thing that I do, and it's not a tactic, it's just how I feel about these conversations. I get super excited a lot when I talk with family members. When I finally, I'm like, oh yeah, so I'm really into these types of arguments and this. Like, like, I know you're a theist. Like, do you hold to the Kalam? Do you think that's a good argument? Like, maybe we can walk through that. And once I present this open door to them of like, what's your reasonings? Like, not like, here's why you shouldn't believe it, or here's why I don't believe it, but like, no, I want to understand more about you, right? Like, what is it about you that believes this? And you give them this sense of, I care. And if I'm going to preface that, if you don't actually have that sense, then you shouldn't be in the conversation. You should genuinely care what that person thinks, because if we're in the pursuit or the domain of finding truth, it has nothing to fear from investigation. And so you should have no problems the same way that they shouldn't. But I would add, hopefully you can kind of, some people have to be kind of packaged and catered a certain way before you can get to the meat. And some people might look at that as a crappy way to do things, or saying that you're disingenuous. But no, it's just, if you want to have the conversation, you want to actually help them, you have to know how they're going to respond, because what you're saying might not be egregious in any way, but they're just going to take it that way because that's the way they take certain things. And so it's definitely, there's no right answer. We're all trying to kind of figure it out with our own families. And luckily I'm in a position with my immediate family where it's not an issue. Yeah. And so that's good for me in that sense, but can't tell you how many friends I have whose parents are pastors, and they bring these things up to me, and they're so excited that, they can talk to someone at all. So I get that, completely.
Jared, you don't have to have these conversations either. If you feel that you need to, because you are in a position of closeness, of familiarity, of intimacy with a family member, and you feel that you might be in the best position to get them away from extreme beliefs and practices, then maybe it is incumbent upon you to take those actions. But if you don't think that you're in that position, you don't have to take action. The prayer for serenity came to mind. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I can't change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I think that, not to read it like, I don't know, that's it, James T. Kirk, I don't know, but you need to understand that there are some things you can't change. You're not the one to change it, and sometimes your energy is better spent not fighting every fight, not fighting that fight with that person, but maybe applying it to other aspects of your community, undermining it. So don't beat your head against a wall, really, unless you really feel that you're the person to do it. And another thing is, if you've made your position on a particular group very clear, maybe the best way for them to walk away from that ideology is to be an exemplar, a great example of a person who rejects that, who cares for truth and justice and all the good things, and who rejects that because you're a good person. You don't have to get into the reasons, but like, well, Jared's a good person, and they think that this other thing is wrong, and there'll be a little seed in the back of their head, a seed, I don't know, a bug in their ear, saying that maybe being good and believing this isn't synonymous. Subtle messaging that you might apply rather than a direct attack could be more effective. And also finding the members of your family who are more in sync with you, building a consensus within the family until finally maybe the community of the family changes tone over time, and then the last holdout is the one who changes seemingly on their own, but truly because of actions of yours and the other members of the family.
And the point you make about being like, that example, I think is great, because it's like, that's not going to indicate the truth, right? If they're a great example, that means that there must be no God or something, right? But it might just tear down the wall for them to go, okay, well, I recognize my biases. I thought atheists were like this, and that's why I didn't want to be like this, and I wanted to confirm certain things. And now you're at this scenario where they've broken down that first set of walls, right? Because now they have an example of someone like, oh, okay, they're a decent person. Not all atheists eat babies, like I thought, which is something I actually heard recently from a theist, that they
just the good ones
thought that was the case. But anyway, and so I think once it's like what Shrek said, it's like a onion, right? There's layers, man. There's layers to it. You just got to kind of peel each one until you get to the center. Hopefully once you get to the center, they're at the point where they genuinely just want to know the answer. For me, I was in a point of desperation to look for some answer, and it didn't just come to me, but I'm so much happier now that I got those walls broken down and rebuilt back up in some way than, with a sturdy foundation than I was to just accept whatever it was. More so for me, spiritual nonsense type of claims, but I hope that helps in any way.
Oh yeah, no, you guys were super helpful. Thank you. That was a lot to think about, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. We appreciate the call. It's very beneficial for so many listeners can benefit from these types of calls. So they're never to be put on the back burner compared to the atheist conversations. I think these are great for the future for people to kind of analyze and look at.
Well, thanks for calling, Jared.